Bon dia, buenos dias, good morning. It's a pleasure to open the second day of this School of Advanced Studies on Water and Society Under Change. And I thank Professor Patricia Gober for this new lecture. And the floor is yours.
Bonjour, buenos dias, good morning. I'm happy to be here, and I thought what I would do is to follow up on, in greater depth, with something that I raised yesterday. How many of you were at my talk yesterday? Oh, okay, good. Then I can spin off what we already talked about, and then move into greater detail. So I wanted to talk about decision-making under uncertainty as a strategy for water resources management. I think I conveyed yesterday that it was part of our funding program to do decision-making under uncertainty research. But when I began this research, I didn't really know what it was or when it was appropriate, and this was not an area in which I had much expertise. And so I had a considerable amount of learning about why these techniques would be more appropriate for the water resource problems that we were dealing with in central Arizona. And I would like to stress those why problems today. I think I come from a background of problem-solving country. So think about the United States, and in 1971, our President Kennedy declared that we would put a man on the moon. And 9 years later, it happened. It was a complex, big, technical problem. We took, the engineers in our country took on this problem, and it got solved. It was a kind of a technical problem that could be solved in a reasonable time frame. These decision-making problems are not like that. They're different in the way the problem is defined, in our capacity to solve them within a period of time. They're fraught with political issues that we talked about yesterday. And decision-making under uncertainty problems are managed, not solved. And so there are a number of people started writing about this in the 80s, that we can't solve all the problems that come to our country. And I think one of the big examples were in nuclear weapons. That we weren't ever going to solve the problem of managing nuclear weapons, that this was a problem worldwide that would be managed but not solved. I was listening to the news last night in the hotel, and there was a story about Ebola in Central Africa, and the patients and their families coming to attack the health workers who were there to deal with the Ebola crisis. And it came to me, I guess I was thinking about decision-making under uncertainty problems yesterday, and it came to me that the Ebola crisis is more a DMUU problem than a technical problem waiting to be solved, and a global health crisis. It's a decision-making under uncertainty problem that we're going to have to figure out how to manage over the long term. So I think we've come to see water resources as something like that. And let me say, traditionally, the way we've managed water resources in the United States and indeed globally is to predict and plan. We've treated it like a technical problem. So we have taken probability distributions, like the one I'm showing you here, that is stream flow on the Salt and Verde river systems above Phoenix. I showed you a map yesterday about the water sources in Greater Phoenix, and we have water from the watersheds immediately north of Phoenix. We have water from the Colorado River, and we have water from groundwater sources. This is the probability distribution that water managers have used since for the last 50 years to plan water resources in Phoenix. We used the past as a past empirical record as the basis for planning for the future. Predict and plan. I can tell you that when I moved to Canada, we had similar probability distributions for the Saskatchewan River Basin, which Howard talked about yesterday as being our research site. I felt like I was moving into a water planning world that was quite comfortable to me because the systems, the methods for long-term water planning, what's our supply, what is our demand, how are we going to meet that demand, was pretty much guided by these empirical records that we had developed over 100 years of stream flow records in both the United States and Canada. And indeed, this is the water resource paradigm globally. So I had been thinking about this problem, and in 2008, I was quite moved by this article that I read in Science that was a design for you guys in water resources. So this is Milley et al., 2008. And these are hydrologists. And hydrologists declared in Science, the major journal, at least in our country, that talks about the latest scientific discoveries and the policies about science. These are hydrologists speaking to other hydrologists in an era of climate change. And they said that stationarity is dead. What they meant by stationarity is that the past is a good basis. Those past empirical records are an adequate basis to predict future water resources. That is a stationary mindset for water resources management. You people in your field of hydrology, some of the leading lights declared that those probability distributions in an era of climate change, in an era where human land use decisions are fundamentally reorganizing water systems, it was declared that the past method of predicting the future should be rethought. So stationarity is dead. This is a very highly cited paper. This is a very important idea. Over the subsequent 5 years, everybody at all these professional meetings were talking about stationarity this and stationarity that, and we've got to find new methods for, we've got to rethink those water stream flow records from the last 100 years in the United States, in Canada, indeed in Brazil, as the basis for future water planning. So this is this comes as I'm a social scientist. Remember, I'm an urban geographer, but I'm trying to understand this water system that I've been charged to infuse with new ideas. So this paper was tremendously important to me and to my thinking, and I think resonated when I began to show this paper and talk about what it said to the hydrological community. So problems of deep uncertainty are the decision-making under uncertainty had been around for 40 years, pioneered by a group of social scientists who would call themselves decision scientists. So their science is in supporting societal decision-making about a range of big, important issues. They regarded, let me say, these decision-making under uncertainty problems, not all problems. Some problems, we've got probability distributions that are appropriate for understanding a future risk. And we ought to be using them, but there are problems for which there are not. So this decision-making under uncertainty problems were called different things by different groups of people. So a number of people started calling them wicked problems. They were wicked problems because we didn't have the probability distribution that our field has traditionally used to manage the complex problems that confront us. There's wicked problems are managed, not solved. So it's an important difference in mindset. In going to the moon, there was a challenge, and 9 years later, problem solved. This was a technical problem using distributions that we had great confidence in, had enjoyed widespread public support. But we've come to realize that there are problems like managing nuclear weapons, like Ebola, like water, that are different than the technical problems that we have taken on and been able to solve so effectively in the past. And these are what we would characterize as decision-making under uncertain problems. So there's fundamental disagreement on the forces that shape the future. These are controversial problems. We don't all agree on, is the water problem a result of, is it triggered by climate change? Has it been triggered by human land use patterns? Has it been, people disagree about the reasons for some of the water resource inadequacies that we experience in the United States and certainly worldwide. So there's a disagreement about the problem definition itself, the probability distributions used to define the relevant problems at hand, and there is a disagreement about how to value alternative outcomes. Wins for some people are losses for others. I can give you an example, and it'll come up in my discussion later on, that the half of the share of Colorado River water that belongs to metropolitan Phoenix has been, as a result of legal decisions, has been assigned to one of the Native American communities that occupy what is now the urbanized region. And so this Indian community of less than 1,000 people now controls half of the Colorado River water that flows into Phoenix. What are their priorities regarding the use of this water? Will it be used, as they have traditionally argued, to re-establish subsistence agriculture on Native American lands that are now suburban housing developments? Or will the relevant Native American community, the Gila River Indian community, use its water rights to support suburban water development? We flat out don't know, and they don't say. Maybe they haven't decided. I think they haven't decided yet. But the outcome of the assignment of large amounts of water to the Gila River community has been a great economic opportunity for the tribe. It's also for the for the 5 million people who live in this urban region. It's a source of enormous uncertainty about we just don't know what kind of decisions they're going to make about the use of their legal and appropriate water rights. So gains and losses are hard to establish in decision-making under uncertainty problems. There are winners and there are losers. But it was always easy for me to see that water resources in central Arizona were decision-making under uncertainty problems. There are winners and losers associated with the process. I showed you this yesterday, and let me just run through it again and emphasize that we ask different questions about the water system once we acknowledge that water resources management is a problem of deep uncertainty. We don't focus our attention on the climate models. We focus our attention on what are a range of future what is a range of the way the future might look, and how do the decisions that we make today alter that future? It's a very different mindset. It's a different mindset than predict and plan. That we're going to use these historical probability distributions to plan our future, and we all feel very good and smug about that, and it's a can-do technical problem, and we can solve the problem. That's a very different problem than one in which we think about we focus on what kind of policy actions can we take that can alter this system that we're really interested in. I mentioned yesterday that we engage in quite a bit of exploratory modeling to explore alternative futures and figure out which one might be the best option. We're managing this problem. We're not solving the problem because people may have different ideas 20 years from now about what their priorities are in this complex system. So best we can do is to get through the, I think I mentioned yesterday that Las Vegas had a intake valve from the Colorado River that was going to be rendered, probably, it's a matter of time before it's rendered useless in taking water from its major water source of Lake Mead. So they invested technology to build a lower intake valve that will secure their long-term future conditions. This is a DMUU solution to a complex problem. They've managed the problem for the next 25 years. Who really believes, I don't think anybody really believes that we're gonna fix it forever. It's a DMUU problem. And we try to come to understand the complex system that governs water resources in our region. We look for what policies work best, and I'll say more about this, across a range of climate futures, given that we don't know what the climate has a profound effect on those river basins that deliver water to Phoenix, on which it depends for its water resources. So we don't really know we assume there will be longer drought conditions, but beyond that, the specifics are really unknown to us. So you know, we look for solutions that are going to work well across a range of potential futures. I think I mentioned yesterday that that's what decision-making under uncertainty people talk about as robust solutions. It's this policy choice, or this basket of policy choices, is robust against a wide range of potential future conditions. It may not be the optimal, it may not be the most efficient, but it's gonna be there for us over the long term, irrespective of what the climate conditions will be. So I think I mentioned something about this yesterday, but I wanted to elaborate on today. And we talk about sort of water resources uncertainties, and I think I alluded to some of these yesterday. Climate is but one influencing the water supply. The water demand and population growth, we're sitting at 5 million. We could be 8 million in 2020 or 2030. We could be staying at 5 to 6 million. So it's a big difference in population growth, and we don't know what it is. We talked about regulations yesterday. The 1980 Energy Policy Act in the United States, that mandated new fixtures and appliances in every new home, and required new fixtures and appliances in remodeled homes. And we looked at some of the impacts that those have had nationally on per capita water use. So there have been some pretty this shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was a surprise to many of the water managers, the kind of impact that had on water resources. I can tell you too, as a result of my experience, we've drawn together, I mentioned yesterday, 80 water managers from across the country that are all experiencing these climate effects, these policy impacts, and are trying to make sense of them and learn from each other. And they were pretty much nationally, the water management community was surprised by the impact of these regulations. They were also uncertain. We talked about price signals yesterday. They were also very uncertain about what will be the city government can impose these price signals. How economists can be as arrogant as I'm afraid we all can be, as arrogant about the research results as many others. They can spin up impacts into these models, but in fact, there's very little research to support the public response to varying conservation signals. So what if we mandate no outdoor water use during a period of drought? In Phoenix, half of the municipal water use is for outdoor purposes. So if you begin to send policy signals to people to make it, to find people, this happened in Canada. There was a problem with the water filtration system, and so they mandated no outdoor water use for it was between a month and 6 weeks. And there was a slight, in fact, when you look at the empirical record subsequent to that, there's some minor response, but people want to wash their cars, they want to water their lawns, they want to hose off their sidewalks. These are common behaviors in cities of North America. And people were less responsive than what was expected to these policy signals. So all over the country, water resource managers have confronted short-term periods of shortage and have tried to implement, California have implemented water savings plans. And there's relatively little social science to support the efficacy of those policy decisions. So it's one thing to have the policies, and it's a second thing to know that those policy decisions are having the intended impact on human behavior. And in fact, we know relatively, from my review of the water conservation literature, there's a very cursory understanding about how people will respond. How do high-income people, they don't, how high-income people are going to respond to moves to cut off their water. In much of Los Angeles and Phoenix, all across the United States, people have their lawns and gardens controlled by timers and electronic systems that are geared to put the landscape, put the water on, and then turn it off 3 times a day, which is perfect to keep up nice green, emerald green lawns that many of us have traditionally grown up enjoying. They don't even know how to retime their or reset their irrigation systems. So the pronouncement by the city of the need to save, to not use water for outdoor purposes is not translated particularly well to. We know this in terms of human behavior. So we worry about some of these policy signals. There's uncertainty associated with how people are going to respond to the signals that we're giving them to reduce their consumption, not even indoor consumption, just discretionary outdoor consumption. We've talked about some of the uncertainties associated with policy choices, winners and losers. The human response to policy signals I just mentioned. Political uncertainties we talked about yesterday. We can take policy decisions when a wise water manager would take decisions and a city leader would take decisions when the policy environment is appropriate for them to do that, and they wouldn't do it when they don't have public support. Many of these climate change adaptation policies are designed now for public engagement and public input into policy decisions, because if people don't believe in them, if people don't support them at the what we call grassroots level, they're probably not going to achieve the ends that they were to which they were intended. So my next talk is going to be about social learning and water management. And there's a science, a growing science about social learning and how do we bring people along with us in these. We're not going to predict and plan anymore. We're going to get some advice from the constituents of our decisions and bring them along with us to the extent possible to produce publicly palatable decisions. I already talked to you about Native American water rights, enormous uncertainties associated, huge uncertainties associated with them. Governance and the spatialization of risk. Let me say a little bit more about that here. We don't have in metropolitan Phoenix one big water system. We have, the metropolitan area is divided into 120 water management zones, or into 120 politically independent local units. And I'm showing you the largest 35 of them. And this map is to show you that they all have different combinations of water sources. So the green is our groundwater resources. The purple are the watersheds immediately north of Phoenix, and the white are Colorado River water. So what you've really got is a fragmented community, a politically fragmented community with different water sources. So in an ideal world, the first rule of long-term stability is to collaborate and share. And to have these sharing agreements in place 20 years before you really need them. So if there are cutbacks on the Colorado River, it's going to affect some communities. In fact, a community where that's adjacent to the one where I live, it's going to impact Scottsdale very heavily. It's not, I live in this community, which is Tempe, which is completely dependent on the upstream watersheds. So that I say this because there's an obvious avenue for planning, for reducing future risk. And that avenue involves sharing risk across these 35 communities when water from the Colorado is short, then we've got already set agreements with neighboring communities to share their plentiful water from the immediate upstream watersheds. So these vulnerabilities stem from the lack of serious long-term planning to be able to reduce the potential risk. So it also opens up the possibility, and I've always seen this as a possible future, that groundwater will be in short supply on this part of the metropolitan area, and people will have, and they do. There are communities that do receive their water from water trucks. So trucks deliver water to individual homes to provide water in a shortage condition. So some of these communities have experienced this, I predict will experience this in the same metropolitan area, 20 miles apart. Well, you have my community, the people in my community washing driveways with outdoor water. That is a very real possibility, and you can imagine the potential for social conflict to result from that kind of a situation. We're set up for that. Politically fragmented, everybody's got different interests. There's very little real cooperation, or there are no agreements that I know of in place for 25 years from now, when there are periods of extended droughts. So let me say that I think the governance. If you ask me what is really the biggest challenge for water resources management in central Arizona and indeed across the United States, it's not climate change. We put people on the moon. we ought to be able to figure this out. But our governance, and the governance is the main challenge in Canada as well. The lack of governing structures that can anticipate what is down the road is the major challenge that we face. So let me tell you what we did. Do I want to say? I think I want to tell you what we did. So how do you contribute scientifically to this conversation about 25 years from now? Planning for an uncertain future. How do you look for robust strategies so that we're ready for the uncertainty we know is coming. So I, with colleagues, wrote a paper in Sustainable Cities and Societies, and we decided to ask what-if questions. We worked with our partners in the community and spent quite a long time sorting out what the relevant policy levers for us were. We made it into a social science project itself. So we reviewed the literature, the newspaper articles about water management in the region. We looked at reports that were being written. We did structured interviews with 15 water managers in the region to try to figure out what was on the table. I think if you were here, most of you were here yesterday, you heard me say that they don't want to talk about climate change. This is the reality of the political world in which we operate. Okay, so what do you want to talk about? What can be part of the conversation for managing risk 25 years from now? So we discovered what those were, and then we put those into a simulation model to look at some of the results, and then made those available put them into our water simulation model. We were, I don't know if I want to say lucky, but we used since we knew people didn't want to talk about climate change, were they more comfortable talking about, they were more comfortable talking about our climate history and prehistory. And if you look at, coming out at about this time, we were doing our work, were tree ring records regarding the Colorado River over from 800 to 1900, the start of the written records. So we had tree ring records that had, but the real empirical record, it's not the climate scientists manipulating their parameters in the climate model. These are real tree ring records of the prehistorical past. So let's not talk about a probability distribution of 100 years. Let's talk about a probability distribution of 1,000 years. And let's not have a conversation with people about what the, whether we should accept this climate model or that climate model, and whether these parameterizations in the model are appropriate or not. Let's talk about what we know really happened 1,000 years ago in Phoenix, and ask the question, what if that were to happen again? Would we be ready, and how could we be ready for that kind of condition? So what we did is to focus on this period in the 1300s, in the 12th century, of we call it the medieval mega drought. So it was a serious drought condition that in fact pertained over an extended period of 100 years. And I think I mentioned yesterday that there was in prehistoric times, from 0 to this time, there was a very large, sophisticated prehistoric Native American population in the region. 40,000 people. Large, dependent on irrigation and agriculture. That civilization disappeared during this time period. So you gradually lost these 40,000 people who had lived there. This story is communicated in the schools of the metropolitan area. Most people are familiar about this story. So we played on that story that we knew people had some understanding of and some feeling for. So this, what would happen if we encountered in the future something similar to what caused 40,000 people to abandon this place as a site to live in prehistoric times? So the research question was what could modern Phoenix withstand, could the water resources in modern Phoenix withstand another medieval drought? And so we used the water sim model that I talked about yesterday, and we fed those prehistorical records. What we did is to take 40 traces of river flows, and what we did is to impose then the medieval drought conditions on each of those 40 the traces, and then we developed estimates for how much water would be flowing from the watersheds immediately north of Phoenix, and what would be the level of groundwater. We focused on groundwater outcomes because I want to remind you from yesterday, we regard groundwater as our bank. Historically, the region was able to weather drought conditions because they could draw groundwater to supplement the loss of surface water. So that using groundwater strategically as a bank is one strategy to manage the long-term risk of dire climate conditions in metropolitan Phoenix. We used 5 policy options that we derived from our systematic analysis of the policy conversation. We spent 2 years talking about 2 or 3 years talking about the climate models and climate change, only to discover that people didn't really want to, that wasn't on their policy agenda. There wasn't anything they felt that they could do to alter that. And so what were they willing to? What did they see as levers that they could pull in their community to alter water use and water sustainability? So they're willing to talk about population growth and management. As I said, I think the population projections are we're sitting at 5 million people. We could be 8 million people in 2040. They're willing to talk about municipal and industrial water conservation because those kinds of signals have been, those kinds of strategies can certainly buy us more time in dealing with a potential mega drought. So that's on the conversation. They've got water education programs, they've got water conservation programs. This is something that they talk about as part of their everyday business. They were willing to see those processes included in the water models the water model that we developed. They were willing to talk about groundwater banking and recharge. I think it's obvious to everybody that groundwater as a source of future supply and historically the reliance on groundwater to keep the place moving forward even under difficult climate conditions has happened. They're willing to talk about water reuse, water, and in fact, most of the municipal water is in fact reused, except keep in your mind that half of the municipal water use is for outdoor purposes. So you're not going to reuse water that's lost to the atmosphere. But what indoor water is generated and is put through the sewer system is in fact being reclaimed by most urban water companies. And supply augmentation, this means getting water from other places, adding to supply. In our particular situation, I think what would water augmentation look like in Phoenix? It would be building a desalination plant in Southern California, and using making a deal with California, where we would take out their Colorado River water, and we would build a desalination plant on the coast that they could then use. So when we talk about supply augmentation, we're talking about big construction of a desalination plant. And then once we had our traces, we subjected WaterSim to the trace conditions of the past. We asked these what if questions. We asked these decision making under uncertainty. What if Phoenix faced the mega drought conditions that were experienced in 1300. This is not such a wild idea, you know. This really happened, and it resulted in the demise of a civilization. Why don't we ask that kind of question? And I know that's a hard diagram to look at, but the yellow line looks at what would happen under business as usual conditions. What happens if we didn't have a mega drought? And the red line looks at what would happen between 2000 and 2060 under mega drought conditions. So there would be two impacts. The first one pretty obvious. Under the red line, you'd have less water banked in we'd have less money to put in the bank. We'd have less water. Our groundwater levels would be lower, so we'd have less security to draw on under mega drought conditions. But also, that larger red line represents the uncertainty associated with that prediction. We'd have less water, but we'd probably have less water, but we'd have an awful lot more uncertainty surrounding what we think the water supply would be. So we'd be living and we'd be functioning in a situation of much higher uncertainty than we face in today. And then we played games with our model, games with imposing. We did sensitivity analyses of all the policy variables. We said, what if the top one is growth management? What if we had business as usual, and then 75% of existing growth, 50% of existing growth, and at the top, no growth at all? And I think what we concluded from this simulation is under a no growth scenario, if we just decided to be the 5 million people that exist there today, we probably could bank enough water. We could manage just by being smaller. We could manage these dire physical conditions that pertained in our region 700 years ago. And then there's the sensitivity of the model. That was a good finding for us. What would be the effect of conservation? Conservation would reduce our give us longer sustainability, since it's a sustainability paper. But it wasn't as strong a force. We could get just so far with water conservation, but the real determinant of whether there would be long-term sustainability of the water resource was in managing population growth. We saw the same. We did the water reuse, but you see, we gain more time by water resource or by water reuse, but only up to a point. And that we figure that line flattens out because there's only so much water that can be reused, and that half of our water use is outside. So you reach that potential point where having more doesn't really extend the water supply. Water banking and water augmentation, I think you see higher levels of water banking takes the unevenness out of the system. It doesn't provide that much more water security. And the same thing for augmentation. We could even out the supply over the long term, but it's not really going to. The real action is in population growth and in conservation, rather than those other tools to take the year-to-year variation out of the system. We also, I know this is a little hard to see and a little hard to explain, but what we really always intended was for people to sit down and to play with these policy options and to add and mix them in various ways that were appropriate for their exploration process. You know, this is models. These are not models to solve a problem. These are models to facilitate exploration of alternative futures. So we just organized this one to show one kind of sequence of the way the policy options could be organized. And in the top pattern, we we see that if we chose to grow at 75% of the existing growth, don't forget, we're okay under a no-growth situation, but if we're willing to slow down a little bit, what does that provide in terms of long-term sustainability? Well, what it does is and what you're looking at are the levels of, you're looking at how much money we have in the bank. You're looking at how the groundwater is the bank. So how is the bank looking after 10, 20, 30 years of imposition of these policy signals? So in this case, we have lower groundwater resources, but we have, as we mentioned before, greater uncertainty in our groundwater resources. That's what those blue, the bright sapphire blue patterns look at. They look at the white line is our best guess. The blue is the level of uncertainty associated with that best guess. How the region would respond to, we imposed the mega drought conditions into Phoenix, and what would happen to our supply, our water supply, to our groundwater water supply under 75% of growth. So we've got some uncertainty associated with that. We've got some drop in the groundwater resources. What if we had conservation? So what if we say we're going to conserve an additional 1% of our water every year? We're going to be able to, I think it would involve reducing largely the outdoor use. Well, what we do is we wouldn't gain, we'd still experience a fall in groundwater, but we would have less uncertainty associated with that if we were to reduce our groundwater use. This is just one sequence in which we can look at those policy variables. You can look at them in any combination, in any sequence that's appropriate to the discussion that one wants to have about how do we explore futures that might work for us. We add here water reuse, and we can take with growth management, conservation, water reuse, we can sustain much of our that groundwater bank and have it available to us if we experience the dire consequences in the future. And there's not so much uncertainty. We feel pretty confident about that as an outcome, and we pick up some additional security. We reduce the uncertainty by adding desalination and additional water banking over here. So, can you be ready for an uncertain water future? Well, I mean, it would cost a lot of money for that infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure to reuse water. It would take significant change in behavior, and it would have to alter the mindset. I think when people talk about American cities, they talk about what are their reasons to be. So Washington, D.C. is the national capital. Its economic base is based on managing the federal government. When people talk about Detroit, they've traditionally talked about an automobile-oriented city, and building cars. When people talk about Los Angeles, it's the creative capital, the movie capital of the country, and this is their economic base. When people talk about Phoenix, the the economic base has traditionally been new home construction and growth. So growth, it goes to the construction industry goes to the base of the of the local economy. So starting to talk about the fact that we'll be okay if we don't grow means you have to have a different identity for your economy and the way you present yourself to the rest of the world. So I just offer this to you. We offered it to the community. We published it in Sustainable Cities and Society, and I present it to you today as just one way that we might explore the water resource situation in our region and not get tied down by the climate models, but rather focus on potential futures that we could see. But the growth management is would be a huge political. I don't want to say problem. It would be certainly a different way of looking at this, the city and its future. But I think this is what when we talk about the importance of or the potential for decision making under uncertainty to address water challenges moving forward, this is the kind of stuff I think we can do. Kind of build models and play with them and use them for exploration rather than to determine the best problem, the best outcome, or the most likely outcome. Our goal was always to shift the conversation from climate change, which people didn't want to talk about, to policy options, which they were happy to talk about. It's a different conversation. I think we were a group led by social scientists, but there was a heavy hydrology and climatology component associated with our project. But we tried as much as possible to emphasize the human dimension of drought management. What is it? What could we do in terms of human behavior to prepare for an uncertain future climate, and emphasize use models for exploratory purposes to simulate alternative futures, emphasize policy and human actions. What can we do? I think we're trying to learn how to, in a scientific way, we're trying to learn how to manage uncertainty, not be paralyzed by it, which I think we have largely been in many. We've done too much of that in the United States, and we've done too much of that over the last 20 and 25 years in responding to the scientific signals. So why don't we provide different kinds of scientific tools that maybe can move the conversation further. Let's have a conversation about how much risk we're willing to take and what behaviors we're willing to change to reduce that work. We're using the modeling to reveal some critical trade-offs as between lifestyles and growth would be one conversation to have, and we could model that. You know, we could put that in our model to be able to show some results. I'm going to talk in one more presentation I have about the co-production of knowledge. We're not as scientists, we're not the ones that control everything that people know about the problem at hand and any potential. We don't. It's not like the early space program where we can solve this problem. We can't. We can. But it isn't to say that we can't do anything useful. We can provide models that support the public conversation about climate change and how we adapt to climate change. And I think I've said in fact, it's an ongoing project, long-term effort. So it's not like we develop our model and we write a paper and we share it with people and it's all done. This is just a process that we're engaged in, and we got ourselves. I think I mentioned yesterday the benefit of having a 15-year research project allowed us to make mistakes and learn from our mistakes and to develop different. I think we learned how to produce useful information in the course of 15 years. It wasn't like we learned that in 6 months, but having the time to be able to make mistakes and learn from them and move on was very, very important. But I think that's in the essence of, let me go back to where I started, to decision-making under uncertainty. These are problems and these are processes that we manage. We don't figure it out, solve it, and then go on to something else. We're in the business of long-term management. And accompanying that business of long-term management is long-term learning. And so hence I'm setting myself up for my next talk about social learning for decision-making under uncertainty. But I'll be happy to take any questions you have or comments. I'd be interested in your comments.
Well, I have 4 days or 5 days of questions and suggestions. I'm very excited. Well, I tried to start this brainstorming with the coffee break is there. And today we have the reinforcing of a new artisanal bread I baked it yesterday. A social hydrology bread. Or a panta-rate bread. Okay, my question is, can you please, Patricia, come back for for my question? The first simulations you present when you present banking and no growth. This one. So tell me, well, we try to imagine we have 5 startups. This is young people. This is the first startup is about, the second is about people like to make conservation, ecosystem conservation, more related to biology, ecosystem-based adaptation. The third group is coming from banking, so startup related to trade-offs, some carbon trade banking or even water banking that here in Brazil is also under discussion, and part of it is being set up but not really implemented. And the fourth group is related to more chemical groups, reverse osmosis, reclamation. And the augmentation here, I understand, related to the a decrease in demand. It's okay? You are making a sensitivity analysis about 21% of demands, 14% of demands, 7% of demand. So you are trying to change the demand and in comparison with the business as usual. So my question is, if I am a startup related to water banking.
Can I say just a note? When we say 21% of demand, we're saying that the new desalination plant in California is going to accommodate 21% demand.
Of demand.
Yeah.
Of demand. So this is not take no any signals there. But in terms of banking, for instance, in a long term, if you are going to put money for a strategic, that means perhaps this kind of water banking in comparison with no growth over there, the green line. As you said, the main impact is related to no growth. This is the benchmark we have to do. So when we see these figures, it's a kind of hopeless feeling that this is okay. It's anything to do. This is only no growth is the only alternative. So this is very, very interesting points. But I'm trying to say, okay, nothing to do about conservation is going to change the situation, or even because the decrease trend is significant. So, okay, 20%, 30%, but we cannot reverse the situation only in no growth or even in 25% of growth. So that is, you have a resilience effect, perhaps in the middle of the century. So they are very interesting points, and this is the points we are discussing in some main metropolitan regions in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Belo Horizonte, and so on. So, of course, the climate is different, the habits are different, and the regulation about water are different. I think that we can discuss some projects to have some replications in Brazilian cities, how these scenarios can produce different impacts in Brazilian latitudes. But for me, it's very surprised that no other approach can reverse the situation of the years of adequate groundwater. So this feeling is the same for you, or for you was an unexpected result about that? You are expecting these results about the future?
I think we were surprised that growth was such a big factor. Because growth is as important to us. This would be a big change in the ethic of the place. But it's also, I think it's an important part of the conversation. And you want to gain, you want to lower the risk of running out of water 25 years from now. Growth is the most important component of it. You can't conserve your way through it. That it has to be. I mean, this is a desert city. This is a city with an annual rainfall of, I'm sorry, I'm still in inches, 6 inches. So these are desert conditions, and how you can you put 10 million people there? You can put 10 million people there, and you can find water resources under normal conditions to support a metropolitan area of 10 million people. Not under mega drought conditions. Not under. We want to have that kind of conversation. I mean, not if you want to be sustainable 25 years from now, when the big mega drought returns. You don't have the capacity to do that. That's a conversation that the community needs to have about itself and its future. I mean, it may be a hard conversation, but I mean that's the conversation that we're going to have in lieu of not having a conversation about the water models, the climate models. But I think that's what we show. Howard.
One of the things you haven't yet talked about is water and health. and the fact that Phoenix is a hot city in the summer, and there's been a major heat island effect in addition to climate warming, and there's a massive amount of water being used for outdoor water use, but one of the effects of that is to reduce the urban heat island and make it safer for people to live. So could you say a little bit about that dimension of the problem?
Well, I think you've said it. You said it well. What we didn't talk about in this paper, but we're trying to talk about a bit more, is the urban heat under climate change conditions, and so especially the nighttime temperatures have risen significantly. I mean, by 6, 7, 8 degrees in a F. But I mean, so 4 to 5 degrees C, 4 to 5 degrees C over the last 50 years. So the cooling that you would traditionally find and would support people at night and help their sleep and reduce the amount of air conditioning used. Think about a positive feedback where the hotter it gets, the more air conditioning you use, which is going to make it hotter. So you've got a positive feedback loop in this heat story that Howard alludes to. I think it is as I read the newspaper and I attend meetings at the city of Phoenix about future problems for the city, people want to talk about heat much more than they want to talk about water. Or maybe they want to talk about heat and water at the same time. But this is a tremendous, and we've used, and the goal of the city is to be 25% tree cover over the future to make it possible for people to wait at bus stops and to facilitate this nighttime cooling. I might add there that nighttime cooling is just critical for a homeless population. So the homeless population in the United States is the largest frequency is in Los Angeles, but it's also, Phoenix has a sizable homeless population. So that's where we see many of the deaths associated with heat, because people cannot cool off at night to get ready for the next hot day. So this loss of nighttime cooling has very significant heat consequences for our most vulnerable population. So the idea is to plant 25% tree cover, but you can imagine in a desert place that's going to involve more and very strategic water use. So water and heat and health are interconnected problems, and I think we have to recognize that. I think what you're saying is that we need to recognize the interconnectivity of water with some of the other challenges that face us. So we haven't modeled heat and health into our problem yet, but it's certainly on the. It is the most important. People talk about heat more than they talk about water in the last 5 or 6 years.
Hi, Pat. Thank you for your presentation. Could you go back to the water scene framework, please? Yes, here. In this model, you have water demand, and I found somewhere you have water consumption or something. Yeah. My question is, you also talked about responses from population for water policies, right? And in this model, you only have water demand. But this water demand is not affected by, it's not a feedback of water policies, right?
It's not a feedback, no.
No. So in this case, I don't know if you are planning to work on water sim, the 6th version. could you implement the responses from population? I mean, from the feedback from these policies into the demands and analyze what happens to this model?
Yes.
For example, if you have the response for the response from the consumption because of the water pricing. I mean, if you increase water pricing, population in different places of Phoenix would respond differently, right? So in what way this could affect the water availability or also the whole system, you know? I don't know. I don't know if from the perspective of social sciences it would be possible, and if it's possible, it's feasible by the community in Phoenix.
I don't think we've captured feedbacks very well in our. You're both talking about feedbacks in our model. I think our model is kind of a bread and butter model. If we implement these policies, these are the individual outcomes that we would see, how those feed back to create new situations to the existing system. Our modeling of feedbacks is not there yet. So yes, for Water Sim 6.0.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that is a question that, through your PhD project, because I'm convincing him that we need to put a feedback in this. That is, I am the guilty person about that. So thank you for the question. You know, in the case of some metropolitan region of São Paulo, we have a preliminary some book made about that. That's if we use about until 2% of the gross net product of a year in all the metropolitan region, putting new water monitoring indoors, and also using wisely, trying to fix the water leakage in the distribution, and also to conserve and protect the headwaters. Altogether, that's cost about up to 2% of all gross net product of the metropolitan region in São Paulo. And this action, in our preliminary figures say that is a water saving of about one main water supply system, very, very popular here, called Cantarera system. So if you're putting 2% of the gross net product, you are saving water. But the water facilities are going into bankruptcy because they have no water to sell. So that is to say that we need to use some feedbacks, but to incorporate in the water pricing, because we need to, the water facilities need to survive. And that is one important point. So we are supposing that there is a feedback in between using money wisely, making water saving. Okay, this is Brazilian latitudes. But the people can adapt to this new framework. That is one point. And the second is the elasticity of our demand here is very interesting. The water elasticity, the demand is in Brazil is very, very interesting, because when you are changing the price, the demand is changing a lot. So we have a big opportunity of discussing social aspect of willingness to adapt, willingness to accept, and also willingness to pay. That is the reason social learning and social behavior to these new frameworks are very important for us also, because this is very new. Water elasticity is not being introduced in the water price still, but there is a plenty of opportunities to discuss about this feedback. This is a very initial in the Benzene.
Well, you know, I mentioned yesterday that the tariffs on water are so low they're really, in Phoenix, they're really not influencing behavior. And so you do have the possibility of using market forces to alter the behavior. In the main, it's just it's a very politically unacceptable solution. It's hard to sell to our population.
Yeah.
I mean, but you know, it's every place is different, and I certainly see it as a viable strategy.
And once upon a time, Hoshin Gupta and co-workers made a book, edited a book. This is Water Bankruptcy in the Land of Plenty. This was in 2012, something like that. And from southern Arizona experience. So I think that's the situation in Arizona, in western states, are very similar to some Brazilian states. Not only northeast Brazil, that is semi-arid, but also through droughts or mega droughts, we are going to have perhaps in a short future. So these examples are very interesting to be discussing in our latitudes.
Well, now that you say that, I think it's interesting to me that we put some considerable effort in trying to find out what policymakers wanted to talk about and integrate those as variables in our model. Nobody mentioned price. This is not it's not a conversation topic that they thought was of relevance or interest to them. I think it can be something that we look at more seriously.
But when the climate is very uncertain, one certain is real. That's the water price is going to augment in our latitudes. So the politicians never like to speak about, because next year, for instance, we have elections here in Brazil, and that is a taboo problem. It's never said anything about water pricing in an election year, especially in municipalities. So it's a very sensitive but very important for our models in social hydrology. Okay, so time to a break. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. We're excited very much. We have several followers in the internet also, and perhaps some questions arrive after the break. Okay, so thank you, and we have a break just now.